Hi everyone and welcome to Playlist Pages to another study guide. Today we're talking about the importance of being earnest Act 2. So please check out my video on Act 1 first. So in this series we're just going to do small mini study guides that help you try and remember things before your exam and help me because I will ultimately be watching my own videos when we have to do the AS Edexcel English Literature exam and talk about the drama component. So with that, let's move straight on to the importance of being earnest. Act 2 takes place at the garden at the manor house. So the garden is described as this very old-fashioned building with roses, a very romantic setting with basket chairs and books, the idyllic place in the countryside. Exactly the rich manner you could have seen in romance books of the times, and even now, this perfect countryside setting, this ideal place to have blossoming new romances, and incredibly perfect and incredibly well suited for the ingenue. So the ingenue is Cecily. The ingenue is what we call a stock character. It's usually this rosy-faced, innocent, naive young woman who has very pure and good ideas about the world. She doesn't really have all this skeptical nature. She doesn't have really goals and aspirations. She's very simple and simple-minded. She lives in the moment and she is very emotional and fully committed to her own sentence. And she's also, of course, very romantic. She is utterly unconcerned with worldly matters such as German. Miss Prism tries to force her back to her German lesson and say, why are you watering the flowers? What is this incredibly utilitarian occupation? We have a gardener for this. And to this, Cecily merely replies that I'm quite well aware that I look quite plain after my German lesson. So, of course, she doesn't really care about German. Instead, she wants to dream and go away into this fantastical world and escape the expectations of society and escape the responsibilities that have been placed on her, much like all the other male characters in this play who also want to escape. But unlike them, she can't really escape as a woman in Victorian society. She can't really go out on her own. She needs to uphold her reputation, and so instead she's forced to daydream as an actual escape, as an alternative to the physical escape that the men can turn to. Miss Prism, Cecily's governess, highlights that Jack would have liked to see her studying and also points out how strict he is. This is very at odds with what we have seen of Jack and his character so far. In that way, Wilde shows how deeply his deception runs. Your guardian enjoys the best of health, and his gravity of demeanor is especially to be commended in one so comparatively young as he. I know no one who has a higher sense of duty and responsibility. Miss Prism then praises Jack for being so much better than his brother Ernest, and Cecily airily remarks that she wishes Ernest was there, thinking German and geology might influence him. This is obviously a ridiculous idea that Algernon is this bad boy, again a stock character, and Cecily believes that she can change him as the ingenue. Well, clearly just some German and some geology lessons are not going to change someone who is wicked in character. This not only highlights her naivety, but also shows the tropes of art at the time. So people had this belief that art was this morally high thing that could really reform someone. And so it started to follow similar tropes and similar themes, with a similar moral of being this good person who can contribute to society. And Wilde felt that this was redundant. So this was clearly a message for the fin de siècle, which was, as I talked about in the first part, the context for the time. So Wilde was part of the aestheticist movement, which aimed to move away from Victorian ideals. And so I think with this, he shows that he believed that society needed time for a radical reform. And so he ridiculed this idea of something so trivial as art or literature, which was essentially becoming the same to change or to reform someone. And so we see Miss Prism as another stock character, right? Wilde is full of cliches. She's just the strict governess who, of course, knows exactly what's right. She's the stuffy person who wants to make sure Cecily conforms. But then we see something that we didn't expect to. Because when Cecily begins writing in her diary, and once again we see that fictional escape, she tries to make up her own interesting life, to sensationalize her own life, because her real life is boring, so she wants to escape into the virtual world. She also remarks that in particular, 3-volume novels are quite sentimental as well. And the 3-volume novel was a staple novel of the time. It was something that people were writing. And just then, Miss Prism admits that she herself actually wrote one back in the day. And we see that she's not quite so simple as we made her out to be. And I think this is a key feature of Wilde's comedy to talk about. So not only is he famous for those witticisms and sentences that don't go the way you expect, but his characters also don't go the way you expect. They always have another added dimension to them. The local Reverend Dr. Chasuble arrives, and Cecily suggests that Miss Prism has a headache and she should go on a walk. So now we see that Cecily not only wants to escape her German lesson, but she also sees the attraction that Chasuble and Prism have for each other without both of them wanting to admit it. So she tries and she wants to set them up because, of course, from reading romance novels all day and daydreaming and escaping from German lessons and intellectual pleasures, this is what she wants. She wants to see love before her eyes. She wants to feel like as if she's a character in her novels and that her life is more interesting than it really is. And she really wants to contribute to Miss Prism's happiness. And although Miss Prism scolds her, ultimately she likes Dr. Chasuble as well, so she does agree to go off on a walk with him. And it's interesting to note the interactions between Chasuble and Prism. So Chasuble says that he hangs upon her lips. We of course know that this is because he wants to listen to her every word and he's in love with her, but Miss Prism looks utterly shocked, so he quickly rushes to say it's a metaphor. And this also shows the hidden influence that women held at the time, because although they didn't really have a social standing in society, they could influence men in other ways, such as Prism manipulating Chasuble into essentially later on moving away from the teachings of the church and marrying her instead, even though she's the epitome of goodness. Chasuble also says that Prism is like Egeria, and Egeria was from mythology, just this wise woman who was an advisor and who always had wisdom and tips. She always knew what she was doing, and Prism is utterly confused. She's like, who's Egeria? I'm Letitia. So although Egeria was an advisor, was very wise, very smart, just a product of high education and intelligence, Prism is merely a product of her class and time. She's just like all the other stuffy governesses who at heart want to dream but don't feel like they can actually dream in this society. Enter Merriman announcing that Mr. Ernest Worthing has arrived. So notice how smoothly everything is going. Dr. Chasuble and Miss Prism walk off. Walk in Merriman announces that Ernest Worthing is here. So this links into the idea of the play that is bien fait. So the play that is well made, going, very artificial in its setting. Much like the Dandy, it is a play constructed on the idea of appearance. Cecily says, I have never met any really wicked person before. I feel rather frightened. I am so afraid he will look just like anyone else. Algernon enters, looking very happy, and she cries out, he does! So let's take a look at Algernon's appearance. He looks just like everyone else, which is at odds with his supposed character of a wicked man. The theme of true appearance is common throughout Wilde's work, particularly famous in the picture of Dorian Gray, of course. So even though he looks like everyone else, we know he's not actually that person at all. He tries to say he's not wicked, thinking that is exactly what Cecily wants. But instead she replies, if you are not, then you have certainly been deceiving us all in a very inexcusable manner. I hope you have not been leading a double life, pretending to be wicked and being really good at the time. That would be hypocrisy. Algernon is in shock that she wants him to actually be bad. Wilde breaks the stereotype of this perfect woman, this tropes, and adds some depth, because even though this is of course not an ideal relationship and Cecily is more in love with the idea of Algernon, and it's a very harmful idea to have when going into a relationship, she just wants some excitement in her life, and so we see that she's willing to find that excitement in any way possible. This is at odds with that simple, naive girl that we have been presented to with at first glance. She begins to prompt Algernon to reveal his so-called wickedness, and Algernon plays along because Algernon is quick to catch on, quick to partake in the enjoyment of it. And she also reveals that Jack has gone off to talk to Ernest and to pick out his outfit because he's moving. And Algernon of course asks, where am I moving? And she replies, Australia or the next world. So either you're going to die or you're going to Australia, because Jack is of course eager to get rid of his brother. And to this, Algernon doesn't have a care in the world. He merely replies that I would not let Jack pick my neckties. He then moves on to flirt with Cecily, and he says that he's hungry and that he wants a flower for his buttonhole. Cecily offers him the martel. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Instead of picking it, Algernon picks the more traditional natural pink rose because Cecily's beauty and purity reminds him of it, and he tells her she's the prettiest girl I ever saw. And he also comments that good looks are a snare that every sensitive man would like to be caught in. So with this, Cecily comments that she doesn't want any sensible man as she wouldn't know what to talk to him about. I know I'm going really quickly, but there's a lot to get through. So I think the important part here is to see the double meaning of the word sensible, both susceptible to his senses and sensible as in having good judgment. It's another play on words, so much like the whole gig with earnest and earnest as revealed to us in at the end. I think with this act of the play in particular, there's a lot of things to comment on when we target the bullet points that show that you have an understanding of the writer's craft. So I think just commenting on the word choice and the creation of comedy through this, as well as the pièce bien faite. Because of course, as soon as they pass into the house, Miss Prism and Dr. Chasuble return. And I also want to say that perhaps they're like the more sensible version of Cecily and Algernon. Even though it seems that they're very different, Miss Prism also used to daydream quite a lot, and Dr. Chasuble is very much like Algernon. And I think that at the end, they just want to show that all couples are similar in different ways because they're all happy. It's like that Tolstoy quote that all happy families are alike, but all unhappy families are all unhappy in their own way, their own different. Continuing on with the discussion of how Wilde constructs comedy. So Miss Prism and Chasuble talk a little bit about marriage, and now we see Miss Prism taking the active role of the guy, subverting gender roles and expectations. Whereas before it was Chasuble who would be like, I hang upon your lips. Oh no, it's a metaphor as soon as he remembers that social expectations. Well, Prism does the same. She also says that young women are green, which is of course very scandalous, and quickly rushes to say that it's a metaphor. But what she wants to do is she wants to persuade Chasuble that the church is wrong, that actually reverends should get married. The ulterior motive, of course, being that she wants to marry him. But just then, Jack enters and interrupts their conversation, and he's wearing a black crepe hatband, gloves, he's in funeral attire, he's playing this tragic role of a man whose brother just died, he's sighing, he's saying, doing this. He is very outwardly putting on a show. Again, he's acting for appearance, ever the dandy, ever the Wildean play with expectations. Prism doesn't really care in the slightest as soon as she finds out that Ernest is dead because she thinks he got what came to him, whereas Chasuble, well, he's a reverend, so he does express his condolences, and Jack quickly makes up a reason. He says that Ernest died in Paris of a severe chill, and of course he doesn't want a funeral because it's in Paris. So the ever convenient explanation. Chasuble suggests, oh, well, why don't I talk a little bit about grief in my sermon on Sunday, and Jack rushes to change the topic and say, oh, speaking of sermons, you Christ sent people, right? So Jack doesn't really care about Ernest in the slightest, and in this regard he has no morals, no apprehensions that technically he made up a person and technically he killed off that person. So though in some ways he wants to appear as uptight and moral, clearly not in this way. All he's concerned with right now is getting christened as soon as possible and finding Gwendolyn and telling her, let's get married, let's finalize the marriage. Chasuble says that he's very willing to have Jack at 5, but then Jack finds out that there are 2 other babies at the time, to which he says, oh, I don't see much fun being christened along with other babies. It would be childish. Would 5:5 do? So the joke, of course, is the other babies. He does not see himself as mature in any way, even going so far as to liken himself to children and infants. At that moment, just when Chasuble is about to depart, Cecily runs in. She's oblivious to the atmosphere present, Jack's mourning attire. Instead, she's consumed with love. She's so eager to tell him the good news. Ernest is here! And she doesn't understand why everyone looks so shocked when she says that, especially when Jack says, oh, he's dead. She merely assumes that it's because of their bad relationship. Algernon comes in and plays the part of the apologetic brother. Jack refuses to shake his hand, but Cecily intervenes, and just for her, Jack does it. This also shows the subtle power women had at the time. After the reconciliation, everyone leaves except Jack and Algernon. Merriman announces that Algernon has 3 portmanteaus, a dressing case, 2 hat boxes, and a large luncheon basket. All for 1 week. Again, the stereotype of the dandy, he brought multiple outfits for every occasion. Jack confronts his friend about his bun-bearing, telling him that his duty as a gentleman calls you back. Algernon shouldn't behave this way, to which he replies, my duty as a gentleman has never interfered with my pleasure in the smallest degree. Algernon tells Jack that he'll leave once Jack changes his clothes. We, of course, as the audience knows, he has no such plans at all. He instead uses the time to talk to Cecily, because as he openly admits to the audience, a very significant admission, I am in love with her. So why is this significant as an admission rather than spoken aside or spoken to someone? Before this, Algernon has engaged in many lies and many false promises, but this admission when he's on his own, when there's no audience other than us, of course, but he isn't aware that we're there, he says that he loves her. So what he's doing right now is genuine. He genuinely has feelings for her. He's not just playing with her for the fun of it. And what follows next is a very comical interaction with Cecily and Algernon, and Cecily trying to write down his remarks in her diary. She reveals to Algernon that in her mind they already have a rich life together because he had caught her attention. A man who's much talked about is always very attractive. And she tells him that she accepted Algernon's proposal on the 14th of February, that is Valentine's Day, showing just how susceptible she is to social pressures. She wants to feel loved and appreciated like everyone else to the extent that she wants a man she never met to propose to her. She wants to live vicariously, and her diary serves as an outlet for her to do it. Wilde has a quote, "Life imitates art far more than art imitates life." Though perhaps overstating the fact, he convincingly explores the many ways in which our perception of reality is affected by the novels that we read. So Cecily at the time has read many romance novels, many popular newspaper articles about this perfect romance story. So of course she imagines her life to be that way, like a plot of one of her books. And this is an idea Wilde adapted from Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Do check out my video on the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and other romantics. She tells Algernon that she wouldn't be able to give him her full attention if he wasn't called Ernest, and he rushes off to Chasuble. Enter Gwendolyn. So at this point, the audience would probably think, uh-oh. And we're on pins and needles waiting to see what's going to happen because we know that invariably at some point they're going to confront each other. So Gwendolyn is very courteous, saying that she loves the name Cecily and is sure they'll be quite good friends. So here we laugh because, well, it's clear that there's going to be an argument of sorts. She also says that the home seems to me to be the proper sphere for the man, and certainly once a man begins to neglect his domestic duties, he becomes painfully effeminate. We see a clear reversal of gender roles, and I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about some contextual information about women in Victorian society. There were three types of women, essentially. The angel in the house, the new woman, and the fallen woman. The angel in the house was this idea of the perfect canonical wife who always places her husband above all else. Her desires and wishes are insignificant compared to his. He's her sole focus. The fallen woman, on the other hand, allows men to entice her to sleep with them. She's the sinner. She can be beautiful and financially independent, but her ultimate position in the eyes of society is low. She's like a sex worker. The new woman is the type that wants to go out and pursue opportunities rather than stay at home. Gwendolyn, I think, is starting to become the new woman. Even though she still believes in marriage, she has to constantly reconcile with her old and new values, whereas Cecily is less interested in developing herself and more interested in the ideal family life propagated in novels. Gwendolyn carefully examines Cecily through her eyeglasses, no doubt an intimidation tactic, but Cecily is perfectly clueless. She says, "Oh, of course, take a look at me, I love being admired." We see the comparison with Gwendolyn and Cecily, whereas Gwendolyn thinks out her every move, she plans to develop in all directions as said in Act 1. Cecily is impulsive. Cecily does things just because. And Gwendolyn, ever the thinker, ever the planner, ever the person considering her future, because she knows just how much her life depends on marriage as a woman in Victorian society, she starts to think, who exactly is this very pretty young woman in the home of my potential future husband? And so she asks Cecily, "Oh, so maybe you're staying with a female relative of sorts, like why are you here?" And to that Cecily responds that she is actually here because her guardian lives here. Gwendolyn immediately becomes concerned because this very pretty young ward, and Ernest never told me he had a guardian. But Cecily is quickly relieved to say, "Oh, don't worry, I am not Ernest's ward. I am his older brother's ward." And Gwendolyn is instantly relieved and laughs like, of course there's a mistake. And just when we think that the scandal is over, the storm has calmed down, Cecily goes ahead and says, "As a matter of fact, I am not his ward. I would say I'm more of his guardian because we're to be engaged." And Gwendolyn rises in anger. She politely says, "There must be some mistake." Cecily, of course, shows her diary, yes, her very made-up diary, and argues that there's no mistake. "Look, I entered it just now." Gwendolyn has her very own diary with her because she must have something sensational to read on the train. And so instead what she does. Sorry, there's people staring at me because I'm in front of the window. So instead, what Gwendolyn does is she pulls out her own diary and they compare diary entries. And both women become convinced that they, of course, have the better claim. So Gwendolyn, because hers was earlier, obviously it's a mistake of some sorts. Cecily, because hers is later, oh, he's fixing the mistakes of the past. The two begin to argue, and just then Merryman walks in. And what follows next is an incredibly comic and awkward interaction where he pours tea and they don't want to argue in front of the servants. They want to preserve the appearance of high, posh, Victorian, polite society, putting on their graces, so they hold off on arguing. And it's really awkward the way that they're sitting there like this. Even the audience starts to feel the awkwardness, but we do see Cecily break conventions because she puts sugar into Gwendolyn's cup when Gwendolyn did not ask for it, and she also gives her cake even though Gwendolyn says that she hates cake. At this moment, Gwendolyn cannot handle it any further. She says, "How dare you break this social convention? I can't stand this anymore." And the two of them are about to argue, potentially go into a full-on fight, when Jack walks in. Gwendolyn, of course, quickly rushes to Jack, saying, my darling, my love, who is this woman?" Jack says that she is his ward and reveals that his name is Jack. At that point, Gwendolyn realizes what's going on, and then Algernon walks in and the same situation transpires, and Cecily realizes that she has been tricked. At that point, both women want to be comforted by each other. My poor wounded Cecily, my sweet wronged Gwendolyn, you call me sister, won't you? And the two embrace as the audience laugh, of course, recalling Algernon's previous remark that women will only call each other sister after they've called each other a lot of things before that. The two women return to the house to act wounded and wait for the men to apologize, and Algernon and Jack argue about Bunburying and like who actually loves who, like why are you involved with Cecily, why are you involved with Gwendolyn, she's my cousin, she's my ward, those typical arguments they've had throughout the entire play. And instead of thinking about their issues, what they do is they stress eat muffins. And here we see that stress eating is a defense mechanism for them, so they want to overindulge. Their solution is not to resolve the problem, but merely to just engage in pleasure and forget about their actual problem. So we do see that harmful upper rich social class attitude that Wilde has criticized before. And I also want to talk about the fact that they want to figure out what to do, but they purposefully avoid the topic and instead argue about trivial things. In the next act, we will see that error is easily forgiven, sin is largely ignored, and this is Wilde's idea of the Felix Culpa, the fortunate fall, because essentially nothing happens and all things have been resolved by pleasure once again. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this mini study guide, and I will see you soon with Act 3.